The stage-coach door opened, and Victoria Hayes stepped down onto the dusty main street of Florence, Arizona Territory, her mouth forming a silent greeting that would never find voice. It was September 1882, and the afternoon sun blazed overhead as Owen Nash watched from the wooden sidewalk outside the general store, his weathered hands gripping his hat so tightly the brim crumpled beneath his fingers. He had expected a mail-order bride. What he had not expected was the profound silence that emanated from her like an invisible cloud when she tried to speak. Her lips moved, shaping words that never came, and Owen saw the flash of embarrassment cross her delicate features before she lowered her eyes to the ground. The marriage broker, a portly man named Henderson who had accompanied her from Tucson, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mr. Nash, I must confess there was information withheld from your correspondence," Henderson said, mopping his sweating brow with a handkerchief. "Miss Hayes is unable to speak. She has been this way since birth, according to her references. She can hear perfectly well, and she reads and writes with exceptional skill, but no sound escapes her lips." Owen stood frozen for a long moment, watching as Victoria's shoulders tensed with anticipation of rejection. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache, with auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet and eyes the color of spring moss that seemed to hold entire conversations within their depths. Those eyes met his now, filled with a mixture of hope and resignation that told him she had been through this moment before. "Miss Hayes," Owen said, stepping forward and extending his hand. "Welcome to Florence. I am Owen Nash, and I reckon your eyes tell me everything I need to know." The transformation on her face was immediate and breathtaking. Relief flooded her features, followed by something that might have been gratitude or perhaps the beginning of trust. She placed her gloved hand in his, and Owen felt a jolt travel up his arm that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. Her grip was firm, confident, and when she smiled at him, it was like watching the sunrise break over the Superstition Mountains. Henderson seemed surprised by Owen's acceptance, but he quickly recovered and produced a leather satchel. "Miss Hayes brought her belongings and this writing tablet she uses for communication. I trust you will treat her with the respect and kindness she deserves, Mr. Nash." "I would not have sent for a wife if I intended to do otherwise," Owen replied, his voice carrying an edge of defensiveness. He took Victoria's small trunk from the stage-coach driver and gestured toward the end of the street. "My ranch is about 3 miles outside of town. We can get the marriage certificate from Judge Morrison tomorrow if that suits you. Tonight, you can stay at Mrs. Pemberton's boarding house. She is a respectable woman who will see to your comfort." Victoria reached into her reticule and produced a small notepad and pencil. Her hand moved swiftly across the paper, and she turned it to show him. "Thank you for your kindness. I would be honored to become your wife tomorrow." Her handwriting was elegant and clear, each letter perfectly formed. Owen found himself wondering what other talents this woman possessed, what dreams and hopes lived behind those expressive eyes. He had been a widower for 3 years. Ever since his first wife, Sarah, had died in childbirth along with their son. The ranch had felt empty and cold despite the brutal Arizona sun, and Owen had finally admitted he needed a partner to share the burden and the rare joys of frontier life. They walked through the dusty streets of Florence, past the adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that made up the small but growing town. The settlement had been established as a supply center for nearby mines and ranches, and it bustled with activity even in the scorching afternoon heat. Cowboys drove cattle through the main thoroughfare, miners staggered from the saloon, and respectable townspeople went about their business with determined purpose. Victoria took in everything with wide, curious eyes, and Owen found himself seeing his town through fresh perspective. The blacksmith's forge sent up sparks as he hammered horseshoes into shape. The general store displayed goods in its front window, precious items brought by wagon from Tucson and Phoenix. The small church stood at the north end of town, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the sunlight, a beacon of civilization in the rugged territory. Mrs. Pemberton's boarding house was a two-story structure with a wide front porch and lace curtains in the windows. The proprietor herself answered Owen's knock, a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a kind smile. "Owen Nash, as I live and breathe," she said warmly, "and this must be your intended bride. Come in out of this dreadful heat." Owen made the introductions, explaining Victoria's condition as tactfully as possible. Mrs. Pemberton's expression softened with understanding rather than pity. "My dear girl, you are most welcome here. I had an uncle who could not speak after an accident crushed his throat. He communicated just fine with paper and gestures, and I imagine you do the same. Come, I will show you to the nicest room in the house." Victoria wrote a quick thank you in her notebook, and Owen felt another surge of admiration for her composure and grace. She had traveled hundreds of miles to marry a stranger, knowing full well that her inability to speak might lead to rejection, yet she held her head high with quiet dignity. "I will return tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Owen said, meeting Victoria's eyes. "We can go to Judge Morrison together and then head out to the ranch. It is not fancy, but it is sturdy and the land is good. I raise cattle and horses, and I do all right for myself." Victoria wrote rapidly, "I am not afraid of hard work. I can cook, clean, sew, and tend a garden. I will be a good wife to you." "I believe you will," Owen said softly, and he meant it. There was something in her eyes, a strength and determination that spoke more clearly than words ever could. "Get some rest. Tomorrow starts a new life for both of us." That night, Owen rode back to his ranch under a sky full of stars, his mind churning with thoughts of the woman he would marry in the morning. He had been lonely for so long, the silence of the ranch broken only by the lowing of cattle and the occasional howl of coyotes in the distance. Now he would have a companion, someone to share meals with, to work alongside, to perhaps eventually love. His ranch house was modest, a sturdy adobe structure with 3 rooms and a covered porch. Owen had built it himself with the help of neighbors, and it had withstood scorching summers and bitter winters without complaint. Inside, everything was neat but Spartan, the home of a man who lived alone and saw no need for decoration or comfort beyond the basic necessities. Owen lit a lamp and looked around with critical eyes. The main room held a table, chairs, and a wood stove for cooking. A rocking chair sat near the fireplace, unused since Sarah's death. The bedroom was small, containing just a bed and a dresser. The third room was meant to be a nursery, but Owen had kept it closed up and empty after losing his son. He spent the evening cleaning and preparing, wanting Victoria to see the place at its best. He swept the floors, dusted the furniture, and changed the linens on the bed with sheets that smelled of sage and sunshine. He brought in fresh water from the well and made sure there was wood stacked by the stove. By the time he finally collapsed into bed, exhaustion pulled him immediately into sleep. Morning came with the crow of his rooster and the pale light of dawn. Owen dressed in his best clothes, a clean white shirt and black vest, dark trousers and polished boots. He shaved carefully, studying his reflection in the small mirror. At 32, he was still young enough to build a new life, old enough to have learned hard lessons about love and loss. His face was weathered from years under the Arizona sun, his hands calloused from ranch work, but he was honest and hardworking, and he would treat Victoria with respect and kindness. The ride into Florence seemed to take forever, though it was the same 3 miles he had traveled countless times. Owen found himself nervous in a way he had not been since courting Sarah all those years ago. This was different, though. He and Victoria were strangers bound together by practical need rather than romance. Yet something about her had touched him deeply in those brief moments yesterday. Something in her eyes that suggested depths he wanted to explore. Mrs. Pemberton's boarding house was already awake when Owen arrived, the smell of bacon and coffee drifting through the open windows. Victoria appeared on the porch moments after he knocked, and Owen felt his breath catch in his throat. She wore a simple dress of pale blue cotton that brought out the green in her eyes, her auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked beautiful and nervous and hopeful all at once. "Good morning," Owen said, removing his hat. "Did you sleep well?" Victoria nodded and produced her notebook. "Very well, thank you. Mrs. Pemberton has been wonderfully kind. I am ready whenever you are." Judge Morrison's office was located above the Land Claims Office, a cramped space filled with law books and legal documents. The judge himself was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He looked Victoria up and down when Owen explained her condition, then nodded briskly. "Can you read and write, Miss Hayes?" he asked. Victoria nodded emphatically and wrote, "Yes, Your Honor. I understand completely what I am agreeing to." "And you, Owen? You understand that marriage is a binding contract in sickness and health, for richer or poorer?" "I do, Judge. I have been married before. I know what I am taking on." The ceremony was brief and businesslike. No flowers or music or gathered friends to witness the union. Judge Morrison read the legal requirements, asked for their consent, and had them both sign the marriage certificate. Victoria's signature was elegant and sure. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Owen hesitated only a moment before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on Victoria's cheek. She blushed prettily, and her eyes sparkled with emotion he could not quite name. They stopped at the general store on the way out of town, so Victoria could purchase a few personal items. Owen noticed she was frugal, selecting only necessities like fabric for sewing, thread, and a new bar of lavender soap. She ran her fingers over a bolt of pretty calico fabric with obvious longing, but did not add it to her purchases. Owen quietly told the shopkeeper to include 3 yards of the calico and wrap it separately. Victoria's eyes widened when she saw what he had done, and she wrote quickly, "You did not have to do that. A man should buy his wife a wedding present," Owen replied. "Besides, that color will look fine on you." The ride out to the ranch gave them time to begin learning about each other. Owen pointed out landmarks and explained the layout of his property. He ran about 200 head of cattle and a dozen horses, managing most of the work himself with help from a few ranch hands during roundup and branding season. Victoria listened intently, her eyes following where he pointed, taking in every detail of what would now be her home. When the ranch house came into view, Owen felt a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. It was not much compared to the fine homes in Tucson or Phoenix, but it was solid and honest, built with his own hands and the sweat of his brow. Victoria surprised him by writing, "It is perfect. A real home." "It is yours now, too," Owen said. "I want you to feel comfortable here. Change whatever you like. Add whatever you need. I have some money saved and the ranch does well enough." He helped her down from the wagon, acutely aware of her small waist beneath his hands, the way she seemed to fit perfectly against him for that brief moment. Victoria smiled up at him, and Owen felt his heart do something strange and unexpected in his chest. Inside, Victoria explored every corner with obvious interest. Owen watched as she ran her hand over the table examined the stove, peered into the bedroom with appropriate shyness. When she noticed the closed door to the third room, she looked at him questioningly. "That was supposed to be a nursery," Owen said, his voice rougher than intended. "My first wife Sarah died in childbirth 3 years ago. The baby, a son, died with her. I have kept it closed ever since." Victoria's face filled with compassion. She wrote, "I am so sorry for your loss. That must have been terribly difficult." "It was the hardest thing I have ever been through," Owen admitted. "But life goes on. I am not expecting you to replace Sarah. She was my first love, and I will always carry her memory. But I believe people can love more than once if they are willing to open their hearts." Victoria nodded slowly, then wrote, "My story is less tragic but perhaps more shameful. I was engaged to be married 2 years ago in Missouri. When my fiancé discovered I could not speak, he broke the engagement publicly and cruelly. I decided to come west for a fresh start where my past does not matter." "It does not matter here," Owen said firmly. "And any man who would reject you for something beyond your control is a fool and not worthy of your regard." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she quickly looked away, busying herself with unpacking her trunk. Owen gave her space, heading outside to tend to the horses and give her time to settle in. He found himself thinking about Victoria constantly as he worked, wondering what she thought of the ranch, if she was happy with her decision, if she would come to care for him in time. When he returned to the house several hours later, the transformation amazed him. Victoria had cleaned and organized, adding small touches that made the space feel more like a home. Wild flowers sat in a jar on the table, their bright colors cheerful against the simple wood. The windows were open, letting in fresh air and sunshine. Something savory bubbled on the stove, filling the house with delicious aromas. Victoria appeared from the bedroom, her sleeves rolled up and a few tendrils of hair escaping her bun. She looked domestic and beautiful, and Owen felt a wave of longing so intense it nearly knocked him over. "It smells wonderful in here," he said. "What are you cooking?" she wrote. "Beef stew with vegetables. Mrs. Pemberton gave me some provisions to get us started. I hope you like it." "I am sure I will. Thank you for making such an effort to settle in. I know this is all very strange and new." Victoria nodded, then wrote something longer. "It is strange, but I am grateful for the opportunity. I promise to be a good wife to you, Owen. I may not be able to speak, but I will show you through my actions how much I appreciate your acceptance and kindness." They ate dinner together as the sun set, the sky turning brilliant shades of orange and pink visible through the window. The stew was excellent, the best meal Owen had eaten in years. He told Victoria about his plans for the ranch, his hopes to expand the herd and perhaps add more horses for breeding. She listened attentively, occasionally nodding or making gestures that showed her understanding and interest. After dinner, they sat on the porch in the cooling evening air. Owen pointed out constellations in the darkening sky while Victoria watched with fascination. The silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward, and Owen realized that Victoria's inability to speak did not bother him at all. In fact, there was something peaceful about the quiet, something that allowed him to hear his own thoughts and feelings more clearly. "I have been thinking," Owen said slowly. "We should work out some basic signals for communication. Nodding and shaking your head works for yes and no, but we might need more. And I would like to learn what you are trying to say without you always having to write everything down." Victoria's face brightened with enthusiasm. She wrote, "I have developed some signs over the years. I can teach them to you if you are willing to learn." "I am willing," Owen said. "We have time. All the time in the world, in fact." The first days of their marriage passed in a gentle rhythm of learning and adjustment. Owen discovered that Victoria was indeed an excellent cook, that she kept the house immaculate without making him feel like a visitor in his own home, and that she had a wonderful sense of humor that showed in her eyes and the expressions that danced across her face. She taught him basic signs for common words and needs, and Owen practiced diligently, wanting to understand her more fully. Victoria learned the routines of the ranch, rising early to prepare breakfast before Owen headed out to work. She tended a small garden, coaxed the stubborn chickens into laying more eggs, and even helped with some of the lighter ranch chores. Owen watched her feed the horses one morning, speaking to them silently with her hands stroking their noses, and the animals responded to her gentle touch with calm affection. They slept in the same bed out of necessity, the house having only one bedroom, but Owen maintained a respectful distance. He would not push Victoria into intimacy before she was ready, understanding that their marriage needed time to develop beyond the legal document Judge Morrison had signed. Sometimes he would wake in the night to find her sleeping peacefully beside him, her face relaxed and young in the moonlight streaming through the window, and his heart would ache with a growing tenderness he had not expected to feel so soon. 3 weeks into their marriage, trouble arrived in the form of cattle rustlers. Owen discovered 10 head missing from his southern pasture, the fence cut and tracks leading off toward the hills. It was a significant loss, representing months of work and considerable money. Victoria found him that evening on the porch, his face grim as he stared out at the darkening landscape. She touched his arm gently, concern evident in her eyes. Owen explained the situation, his frustration and anger pouring out in words that came easier with her than they ever had with Sarah. "I cannot afford to lose cattle to thieves," he said, "but I cannot watch the whole ranch by myself either. I will have to hire men to patrol, which costs money I was saving for other things." Victoria wrote, "What can I do to help?" "There is nothing you can do against armed thieves," Owen said firmly. "I will not have you put in danger." Her eyes flashed with determination, and she wrote more forcefully, "I am your wife and your partner. This ranch belongs to both of us now. Let me help however I can." Owen felt something shift in his chest, a wall he had not realized he was maintaining crumbling away. Victoria was not asking to be protected and sheltered like a china doll. She was offering to stand beside him, to face difficulties together as true partners should. "All right," he said. "I will think on how you can help. But I mean it about the danger. I could not bear to lose another wife." Victoria's expression softened, and she reached up to touch his cheek gently. It was the first truly affectionate gesture she had initiated, and Owen found himself leaning into her palm, closing his eyes at the simple comfort of her touch. When he opened them again, Victoria was watching him with an expression that made his heart race. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Victoria stood on her toes and kissed him, not on the cheek as he had kissed her at their wedding, but full on the mouth. It was sweet and tentative and absolutely perfect. Owen wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as he deepened the kiss. 3 weeks of growing attraction and affection pouring into that connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Victoria's eyes were bright with happiness. She wrote with shaking hands, "I have been wanting to do that for days." "So have I," Owen admitted. "Victoria, I know this started as a practical arrangement, but I am coming to care for you deeply. Your silence does not diminish you in any way. In fact, I find myself learning to listen in new ways, to pay attention to things I never noticed before. You have made me a better man," she wrote. "You have given me a home and acceptance I never thought I would find. I am falling in love with you, Owen Nash." "And I with you," Owen said, kissing her again. "God help me, I am falling hard and fast." That night their marriage became complete in every sense, a union of bodies and hearts that left them both breathless and amazed. Owen discovered that Victoria communicated perfectly well without words, her touches and sighs, and the expressions that crossed her face telling him exactly what she needed and wanted. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the moonlight, and Owen felt a contentment he had not experienced since before Sarah's death. The cattle rustling problem did not resolve itself, however. Over the next week, Owen lost another 8 head, and he heard reports that other ranchers in the area were experiencing similar losses. A group of them gathered at the saloon in Florence to discuss the situation and plan a response. Victoria accompanied Owen into town that day, wanting to purchase supplies and visit with Mrs. Pemberton. She waited outside the saloon, it being no place for a respectable woman, while Owen met with the other ranchers. The meeting was productive, with plans made to organize patrols and share information about suspicious activity. When Owen emerged an hour later, he found Victoria in an uncomfortable situation. 3 rough-looking cowboys had cornered her on the wooden sidewalk, one of them trying to grab her arm while she backed away. "Come on, pretty lady, just one little word," the largest one was saying. "What, you too good to talk to the likes of us?" Owen saw red. He crossed the distance in 3 long strides and grabbed the man by his shoulder, spinning him around and landing a solid punch to his jaw. The cowboy staggered back, blood spurting from his split lip. "That is my wife you are harassing," Owen growled. "And she cannot speak, you ignorant fool. Now apologize before I break your nose as well." The other 2 cowboys backed away, hands raised in surrender. The one Owen had hit wiped blood from his mouth and glared. "How was I supposed to know she was a mute?" he spat. "She should wear a sign or something." "She does not need a sign. She needs men to behave like gentlemen and leave women alone when they clearly want nothing to do with them. Now apologize." Grudgingly, the cowboy muttered an apology. Owen wrapped a protective arm around Victoria and led her away, his heart still pounding with anger and adrenaline. She was shaking slightly, and he guided her to a bench outside the general store where she could sit and recover. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Did they hurt you?" Victoria shook her head and wrote, "I am fine, just shaken. Thank you for defending me." "I have dealt with such men before, but it never gets easier." "You should not have to deal with it at all," Owen said fiercely. "Your inability to speak is not an invitation for rudeness or harassment." She smiled tremulously and wrote, "You are a good man, Owen Nash. I am very fortunate." "I am the fortunate one," Owen corrected. "Now, let us get your supplies and head home. I have had enough of town for one day." The incident left Owen even more protective of Victoria, but she gently pushed back against his overprotectiveness. Through written notes and the signs they had developed, she made clear that she did not want to be hidden away or treated as fragile. She had survived this long by being strong and resourceful, and marriage did not change that fundamental part of her nature. Owen learned to respect her independence while still watching out for her, a balance that strengthened their partnership. They fell into comfortable routines, working together to manage the ranch, eating meals side by side, spending evenings on the porch watching the sun set over the Arizona landscape. Owen found himself telling Victoria things he had never shared with anyone, his dreams and fears and regrets pouring out in the peaceful silence she created simply by listening. Victoria, in turn, filled notebooks with her own stories and thoughts. Owen read about her childhood in Missouri, the loving parents who had died in a typhoid epidemic when she was 16, the lonely years afterwards living with an aunt who saw her muteness as a shameful burden. He learned about her broken engagement, the pain and humiliation that had driven her west, and the courage it had taken to answer his advertisement for a mail-order bride. "You are the bravest person I know," Owen told her one evening as they rocked together on the porch swing he had built. "Coming all this way, risking rejection, starting over completely, that takes real strength." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, and Owen wrapped his arm around her, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. He had not expected this when he sent for a mail-order bride. He had expected companionship, help with the ranch, perhaps eventually a comfortable partnership. What he got instead was love, real and deep and all-consuming, the kind of love that made him understand why men wrote poetry and songs. 4 months into their marriage, the cattle rustling situation came to a head. Owen joined a posse organized by the territorial marshal to track down the thieves who had been plaguing the area ranches. It was dangerous work, and Owen hated leaving Victoria alone at the ranch, but she insisted he go and do his part to protect their livelihood and their neighbors. The posse tracked the rustlers to a canyon hideout 30 miles southeast of Florence. There was a brief gunfight that left 2 rustlers dead and 3 captured, including the leader. Owen took a bullet graze across his ribs, painful but not serious. When he returned home 3 days later, exhausted and hurting, Victoria's face went pale at the sight of his bandaged torso. She threw her arms around him carefully, mindful of his injury, and Owen felt her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He held her close, smoothing her hair and murmuring reassurances. "I am all right, sweetheart. Just a scratch, nothing serious. The doctor in town patched me up fine." Victoria pulled back and wrote with shaking hands, "I was so worried. I imagined terrible things. Promise me you will always come back to me." "I promise," Owen said, kissing her forehead. "I have too much to live for now to take foolish chances. You are my whole world, Victoria. The thought of you kept me safe out there." She helped him to bed, fussing over him in a way that would have annoyed Owen if it came from anyone else. From Victoria, it felt like love made tangible, care expressed through gentle touches and worried eyes. She changed his bandages, made sure he took the medicine the doctor prescribed, and brought him meals in bed until he was strong enough to get up and move around. During his recovery, they talked more deeply than ever before. Owen told her about Sarah, the guilt he had carried about her death even though logically he knew he was not to blame. Victoria listened, and then wrote something that struck him to his core. "You cannot control life and death. You can only love while you have the chance and treasure every moment given to you. Sarah would want you to be happy, not to carry guilt and grief forever." "How did you get so wise?" Owen asked, touching her cheek. She wrote, "Silence teaches you to observe and think deeply. I have had a lot of time to watch people and consider what truly matters in life." As Owen healed, autumn arrived in Arizona, bringing cooler temperatures and the beautiful colors of the desert in transition. Victoria discovered she was pregnant in late October, confirmed by the doctor in Florence during a routine visit. She told Owen that evening with a note that simply said, "We are going to have a baby." Owen stared at the words for a long moment, emotions crashing over him like waves. Joy, terror, hope, and fear all mixed together. The memory of losing Sarah and their son rose up, threatening to choke him. Victoria watched his face, understanding playing across her own features. She took his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach, then wrote, "I am strong and healthy. We will face this together and everything will be all right." "I cannot lose you," Owen said, his voice breaking. "Victoria, I cannot go through that again." She pulled him close, letting him hold her while he worked through his fear. When he finally calmed, she wrote, "You will not lose me. I am not going anywhere. This baby is a blessing, a sign of our love and our future together. Have faith." Owen tried to have faith, but as the months passed and Victoria's belly grew round with their child, anxiety gnawed at him. He became overprotective, not wanting her to do any heavy work or ride into town or even spend too much time on her feet. Victoria tolerated his hovering for a while, but eventually she put her foot down with a lengthy note that essentially told him to trust her to know her own body and limitations. "I am not Sarah," she wrote. "I am Victoria, and I am carrying our baby just fine. The doctor says everything is progressing normally. You must stop treating me like I am made of glass. It is not fair to me, and it is not fair to the memory of your first wife. She would not want you to live in fear." Owen knew she was right. He forced himself to step back, to trust Victoria and the process of new life growing within her. It helped that she remained energetic and healthy throughout her pregnancy, continuing to manage the household and even helping with light ranch work well into her 7th month. They prepared the nursery together, Owen finally opening that closed door and clearing out the dust and memories. Victoria sewed curtains and baby clothes, her skilled fingers creating beautiful tiny garments from the calico fabric Owen had bought her as a wedding present. He built a cradle from oak wood, carving it with love and hope, determined that this child would live to use it. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the desert and new life everywhere. Victoria went into labor on a warm April morning in 1883, and Owen rode hard to fetch the midwife from town. The labor was long and difficult, and Owen paced outside the bedroom door listening to sounds that sent terror through his soul. But Victoria was strong, stronger than he had given her credit for, and when the midwife finally emerged with a squalling infant wrapped in blankets, her face was wreathed in smiles. "You have a healthy son, Mr. Nash, and your wife came through like a champion. She is tired but well." Owen rushed into the bedroom to find Victoria propped against pillows, exhausted but glowing with joy. She held their son in her arms, and the sight made Owen's heart swell so large he thought it might burst from his chest. He knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face as he touched the baby's tiny hand. "He is perfect," Owen whispered. "You are perfect. Thank God you are both all right." Victoria's eyes shimmered with happy tears. She mouthed words she could not voice, but Owen understood perfectly. "I love you. I love you too," he said. "More than I can ever express. You have given me everything I thought I had lost. Hope, joy, a future. Thank you." They named their son Oliver Nathan Nash, and he became the center of their world. Owen discovered that fatherhood was both terrifying and wonderful, that the weight of responsibility for this tiny life filled him with purpose. Victoria proved to be a natural mother, responding to Oliver's cries and needs with intuitive understanding. Her inability to speak did not hinder her in the slightest. In fact, Owen noticed that Oliver seemed unusually perceptive, learning early to read facial expressions and gestures in response to his mother's silent communication. The ranch prospered over the following years. Owen expanded his herd, built additional outbuildings, and earned a reputation as an honest and hard-working rancher. Victoria became known in Florence for her kindness and her beautiful handiwork. She sewed and sold her creations at the general store, the money going into a savings account for Oliver's future. When Oliver was 2 years old, Victoria became pregnant again. This time, Owen was less fearful, having seen his wife's strength and resilience firsthand. Their daughter Elizabeth Virginia Nash arrived in the autumn of 1885. A healthy, loud baby with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. Oliver was fascinated with his little sister, and Victoria wrote that watching him try to communicate with the baby in his own limited 2-year-old way was one of the sweetest things she had ever seen. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of challenges met and overcome together. Owen taught Oliver to ride as soon as the boy was old enough to sit a horse. Victoria taught both children to read and write at the kitchen table, her patience endless as she guided their small hands in forming letters. The house was filled with laughter and love, the silence that had once made Owen nervous now a comfortable backdrop to their daily lives. When Oliver was 5, he asked his father why Mama did not talk like other mothers. Owen sat his son down and explained about Victoria's muteness, making sure the boy understood that it was not a weakness or a shame, just a different way of being. "Your Mama is the strongest, bravest, most wonderful woman in the world," Owen said. "She may not speak with words, but she says more with her eyes and her heart than most people say in a lifetime of talking. Do you understand?" Oliver nodded seriously. "Mama tells me she loves me every day without saying anything. I can just tell." "Exactly right," Owen said, ruffling his son's hair. "You are a smart boy." As the years passed, Owen never ceased to marvel at the life he and Victoria had built together. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Their children thrived, growing tall and strong and kind. The love between Owen and Victoria deepened with each passing season, maturing into something solid and unshakable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Owen took Victoria into Florence for a celebration. They left the children with Mrs. Pemberton, who adored them like they were her own grandchildren. Owen had arranged for dinner at the hotel restaurant, a luxury they rarely indulged in. Victoria wore a dress she had made from deep green velvet that made her eyes shine like emeralds. Over dinner, Owen pulled out a small box and slid it across the table. Victoria opened it to find a delicate gold locket with their initials engraved on the front. Inside were tiny photographs of Oliver and Elizabeth. "10 years ago, I thought I was getting a practical arrangement," Owen said. "A housekeeper and companion to help run the ranch. Instead, I got the love of my life. You have made me happier than I ever imagined possible, Victoria. These have been the best 10 years of my life." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, and she wrote quickly, "Mine too. You saw past my silence to who I really was. You gave me a home and a family and a love I thought I would never have. I would marry you 1,000 times over." They kissed across the table, not caring who saw them, two people completely and utterly in love. When they returned to the ranch the next day to collect their children, Owen felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was his life, this woman and these children, this land and this home. It was everything he had ever wanted and more than he deserved. Oliver grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's perceptive nature and kind heart. He learned the ranch business thoroughly, and Owen knew the Nash property would be in good hands when he eventually passed it on. Elizabeth became a teacher, her gentle patience and clear communication skills making her beloved by her students in the Florence schoolhouse. Both children married well and happily, bringing grandchildren for Owen and Victoria to dote on. The ranch house that had once seemed so empty and cold was now regularly filled with the sounds of family, of laughter and play and love. On warm evenings, Owen and Victoria would sit together on the porch swing he had built 30 years earlier, watching the sun set over the Arizona landscape they both loved. They held hands, their fingers intertwined with the ease of long familiarity. Sometimes Owen would speak, sharing his thoughts about the day or his hopes for the future. Victoria would listen, her eyes telling him she understood, that she cared, that she loved him. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, needing no words at all. After 3 decades together, They communicated through glances and touches, through shared memories and understood feelings. Victoria's muteness, which had once seemed like it might be an insurmountable obstacle, had become simply another aspect of who she was, no more defining than her auburn hair or her skill with a needle. "I was right, you know," Owen said one evening as they rocked gently on the swing. "That very first day when you stepped off that stagecoach and I saw you try to speak, I told you your eyes told me everything I needed to know. And they did. They told me you were brave and strong and kind. They told me you had a heart full of love to give if someone would just accept you as you were. They told me that my life was about to change forever, and it did, for the better in every possible way." Victoria smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. She no longer carried her notebook everywhere, having learned that Owen understood her so completely that they needed fewer written words as the years went by. But she pulled it out now and wrote something she wanted him to be able to keep, to read again, whenever he needed the reminder. "You saw me when others only saw my silence. You heard my heart when others could not get past my inability to speak. You loved me not despite my muteness but with it, as part of the whole person I am. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. I have loved you from that first day when you said my eyes told you everything you needed to know. And I will love you until I draw my last breath. Thank you for a beautiful life, Owen Nash. Thank you for everything." Owen read the note with tears in his eyes, then pulled Victoria close and kissed her tenderly. Around them, the Arizona evening sang with the sounds of desert life, crickets and birds and the distant lowing of cattle. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing while their own children visited over coffee. This was legacy, Owen thought. This was what mattered. Not wealth or fame or earthly achievements, but love and family and the connections that bound people together across years and hardships. "Thank you," Owen whispered against Victoria's hair, "for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy who needed someone to share his life, for being the best wife, the best mother, the best partner I could have ever asked for showing me that sometimes the most important things are communicated without words at all." They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, two people who had found each other against odds and built something beautiful and lasting. Victoria's silence had never been a barrier between them. If anything, it had taught Owen to listen more carefully, to pay attention to the subtle ways people communicate love and need and joy. It had made him more patient, more observant, more fully present in every moment. The mail-order bride who could not speak and the cowboy who learned to listen had become something neither of them anticipated all those years ago. True partners, best friends, passionate lovers, and devoted companions. Their love story was not the easiest or the most conventional, but it was real and deep and absolutely theirs. As the years continued to pass, Owen and Victoria remained devoted to each other and to the life they had built. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, mourned the loss of friends like Mrs. Pemberton, and continued to find joy in simple daily routines. The ranch prospered under Oliver's management, with Owen serving as advisor and elder statesman, his years of experience valuable to his son's continued success. Victoria's hair turned silver, though her eyes remained as green and expressive as the day Owen first saw her. Owen's face gained more lines and his movements slowed with age, but his love for his wife never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and tested by time. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a remarkable achievement in an era when life could be hard and short. The family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration, with food and music and dancing. Owen and Victoria sat in places of honor, holding hands and watching their descendants with pride and joy. 50 years, Owen marveled. Can you believe it has been 50 years since you stepped off that stagecoach and into my life? Victoria smiled and touched his cheek tenderly, the gesture saying more than words ever could. Owen covered her hand with his own, understanding perfectly. Yes, she was saying. Yes, 50 amazing years, and I would do it all again. When Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87, Victoria was holding his hand just as she had held it on so many nights throughout their long marriage. She mourned deeply, but without regret, knowing they had shared something precious and rare. She lived 3 more years, spending time with her children and grandchildren, teaching the youngest great-grandchildren how to sew and garden, and keeping Owen's memory alive through stories written in her notebooks. When Victoria died at the age of 82, she was laid to rest beside Owen in the Florence cemetery under the wide Arizona sky they both loved. Their headstone bore both their names and a simple inscription chosen by their children. She spoke with her heart, and he listened with his soul. Together forever. The ranch remained in the Nash family for generations, a testament to what Owen and Victoria had built together. Their love story became family legend, passed down to children and grandchildren as an example of how true partnership transcends conventional barriers, how love finds a way when hearts are open, and how sometimes the most profound communication happens in silence. The little adobe house where Owen first brought Victoria still stood, preserved by the family as a reminder of where it all began. And on quiet evenings, when the Arizona sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, it was easy to imagine the two of them there still. The mail-order bride who could not speak, and the cowboy who learned that eyes could tell everything worth knowing, sitting together in peaceful silence that was actually its own perfect form of conversation. A love that needed no words because it simply was, pure and true and eternal.